This is Death or Prison, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. The men you are about to hear have spent more than 50 years in prison. We bring you stories of hope and encouragement.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Death or Prison Podcast, brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham. To my right, Mr. Elmo Golden, and to my left, our distinguished guest today, Mr. Eddie Vidal. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Eddie, tell everyone a little bit about yourself and how you grew up.
Yes. First, let me say that it's my pleasure to be here with you guys. I thank God for this opportunity. I was born in New York. Came down to Florida when I was 6 months old. Raised in Opelika for a few years, Carroll City, and Hollywood, Florida, where I spent the majority of my life. The youngest of seven, four older brothers, two sisters. Grew up on the streets of Hollywood, playing sports at an early age. Around the age of 9, a friend of mine introduced me to marijuana. So my older brothers were always involved in drugs. Two of them were in the South Florida Outlaws, so I knew what a party was at a young age. The drug scene invaded my youth at an early age. Before sports, we used to drink alcohol. Before our soccer practice, before our games, smoke a couple joints. At an early age, drugs became a normal part of my life. Led to some poor choices as a young man. Went to high school. I think my focus was more on partying than getting an education. Skipping school, going to the beach, drinking, smoking. My choices as a young man led to something more serious as I got older.
Mm-hmm. When you say young man, what's the age? 15, 13?
Yes, started using drugs at 9. By the age of 13, I was drinking hard liquor and snorting a little bit of cocaine here and there. Those choices, I used to have people that I looked up to when I was a young man. And those people were the ones that were hanging out in the bars, selling drugs, making money. So I gravitated towards that.
Now, are your parents aware of what's going on at this time from your youth up into your teen age?
No, they had no idea. My father was the only one that was involved in sports with me. He was proud of me as I played sports, but when I was outside of sports, I didn't have that fatherly support. But they were not aware of what I was doing. Even at 13, 14, I'd come home at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and there was never questions as to where you been, why you out so late. So I didn't have any restrictions.
Did your father or mother, did they use drugs or anything like that?
My father was a drinker. My mother never touched any drugs. I'll tell you that every weekend we had parties at our house. There was always music and drinking going on in my house on weekends.
Now you're at this stage now in your life. You're really starting to spiral because you have really no parental guidance. You really don't have that stability that you need. The older brothers and sisters that you had around you said that 2 were using drugs. They were part of the gang life.
Yes.
Well, the other siblings, what were they doing?
One of my brothers, Louis, supported me when I played soccer. But we always fought. But I didn't have a good influence in my life. I came from a dysfunctional family. Everybody's doing what they want to do. Nobody's really concerned about what's going on in my life. I'm not concerned about what's going because I'm too busy doing my thing. So there was never a family love there. Dysfunctional.
You mentioned that you were 13 at the time that you started using, various drugs. Where did the money come from to purchase those drugs?
Well, at 13, I got my first job working summers in construction. But the majority of the money that I got to party with came from the older guys. They were always willing to contribute. Hey, come on, let's go to the bar. At the age of 13, I had a beard and a mustache. so nobody was asking me for any ID.
And by older guys, you mean older friends or?
Yes,
Okay.
older
Okay.
friends. Yeah,
Okay.
I gravitated towards the older crowd. They're the ones that seem to have it going on. They're the ones that were doing interesting things. So I gravitated towards these guys were in their early 20s, 30s. So I gravitated towards them, and there was always a party going on. So sometimes I paid for it with the money that I made during the summer job, and sometimes it was just free. It was given.
You got the drug scene. We understand what's going on in your life. Where did the drug scene, the usage of the drugs take you?
Okay. In my early, let's say around 18, 19 years old, drug use increased. I felt the need to drink more, smoke more, snort more. So I started getting into selling the drugs. It was too expensive. I'd go to work during the week, and on Fridays, or Monday, I'm broke. So what I started doing is investing some money in the cocaine, in the weed. So I started selling, partying, using. At age 19, at 20 years old, I experimented with crack cocaine. A friend of mine introduced me to some crack cocaine. At first, it didn't have an attraction to me. I took a hit off crack once, and I'm in Broward, and I heard the airplanes take off in Miami. It was just had that effect on my, but I didn't have a craving for it right off bat. But it developed over time because the more cocaine, the powder I used, the more weed I used, I wanted something else. I believe that the alcohol I drank at a young age was a gateway that started leading into the marijuana, that started leading into the cocaine, that started leading into the pills. So at 20 years old, the habit increased. At 25, I felt the need to start selling more cocaine to support my habit. 25 is when things started to on a downward spiral, really. 25 years old was the first time that I was arrested.
I'm looking at your timeline, 9, 13, 15, 19. How easy was it for you to get the drugs? How can a kid that young just have access to whatever he wants at that age? Was it freely? Is this flowing in the community?
Yes. In West Hollywood is where I grew up. I grew up in a park called Montella Park. And not only the people that played sports there hung out there, but also people that sold drugs. So we'd go to certain corners in the park and you're able to get high. So yeah, the drugs in my community flowed freely. You can find them real easy. They were accessible.
I think that's important for our audience to know that in some of these communities they're just infested with drugs, and so there needs to be some kind of barrier put in place for a young man, a kid, to be exposed to that. It's something that as a community
Yes.
we need to start thinking about.
Yes.
And so now you're 25.
Yes. So I'm 25 years old. Started getting involved with dealing in stolen property. People are bringing me stolen merchandise, and I'm paying for it in cocaine, crack. A couple times I was arrested for grand theft when really I didn't steal the car. Someone came and picked me up. We got pulled over, and I wound up getting arrested. But I always had cocaine on me, so in the middle of the arrest for grand theft, I'm getting charged with possession of cocaine.
Yeah.
At 25 years old, I was sentenced to 2.5 years state penitentiary. Previously, before that, when I say 25 was the first time I got arrested, that was the first time I got arrested and sent to prison. But before that, I've been arrested in and out of the county jail. Driving on suspended license, DUI, possession of marijuana, hashish.
How did it feel knowing that you were going to prison at 25?
I was mad that I got caught. I felt like I should have been slicker than what I thought I was. Scared in a way because I'd never been to prison before. So there was, I can say there was a little bit of fear. I didn't know what to expect at 25 years old, my first time facing prison time. When I was sentenced to 2.5 years, it was kind of a relief because while I was in the county jail, I learned that there was a gain time that's going to be issued out with every sentence, so I didn't have to do the 2.5 years. And at that time, there was a gain time system implemented that every Tuesday you're getting gain time from 0 days to 280 days off your sentence. So I knew I wasn't going to do much time.
Right. You're talking probably in like, what, 1980?
1990.
1990.
1990. When I did get sentenced and made it to prison, it was a piece of cake. I was out in 6 months on a 2.5-year sentence. So when I was released from prison, I went right back to doing what I was doing. At that moment, it seemed like prison was just a little vacation for me.
In those 6 months, there was no, Eddie, I need to change my life. There was no clarity about the situation. Was there anything that ran across your mind that says, look at the condition I'm in, look at this position I'm in. I'm in prison.
Yeah.
And there was no tap on the shoulder.
No. I did have some thoughts on my own, what am I doing? But it didn't stick. It didn't last long. While you're in prison, you can either gravitate to the people that are trying to change, or you can gravitate to the people that are doing the same thing that you're there for. And my first trip, I didn't gravitate towards anything good. And plus, I was only there 6 months. It was like a little slap on the wrist and a little vacation. I got some rest time, and now when I got released, it was, right back at it again.
There are times during our incarceration where we say we come out smarter and better criminals. That's what really happened. You was thinking of a master plan of how can I do this better? How can I be? Yeah. How can I be faster, smarter?
Yes.
And so now you're out, 6 months over with.
Yes. I did get out and get a job. I thought about turning over a new leaf, but it didn't work because the streets were calling me. The fast money was calling me. When I was running the streets, I felt a sense of freedom. That freedom that I sensed didn't last long. You feel a sense of freedom when you're doing what you want to do. When nobody's there to tell you, hey, listen, don't do that. So I didn't have the don't do that in my life. I can recall my parents saying, stay away from them people and stuff like that. Yeah, my parents did. My mother did, actually. But it was in one ear and out the other. Positive influences. Hey, Eddie, we got to do this different. You can't be doing the same thing. I didn't have that.
How long was the time that you were out from your first experience in prison to the time of your next arrest?
Okay. Oof. 3 months later. I was only on the street 3 months. And got arrested again for cocaine possession, marijuana possession. At the time when I was released on probation. And even the probation didn't deter me from going back to the streets and doing what I knew best. I had a sense of familiarity with the street life. And I felt comfortable there because that's all that I knew. 3 months later, I wound up getting arrested again. Violated probation, the CRD probation, and was sentenced to another 2.5 years of prison. At this time, something different happened. I was in the county jail, sleeping in a 6-man cell, and it was during the daytime, and I was the only one in this room. There was a backslidden preacher from Hallandale in the day room of this cell in Pompano Detention. I'm laying in this room that has walls of steel this thick, trying to read a novel. And as I'm reading this novel, I can hear every word that this preacher was saying in the day room, even though I'm on the other side of this steel thick wall. His voice was so loud in my ear that I started getting mad because I couldn't concentrate on this book that I was reading. So as I closed the book and I lay there and I started getting even madder, I sat up on the bunk and I slammed the book down on the ground, and I'm seething hot, man. I stood up and I went to that door and I opened the door and I looked out the door and I cussed this preacher out and I told him to shut his mouth. And I closed that door and I went back and sat on my bunk. And as I sat on my bunk, there was a war going on in my mind. I didn't know what was taking place at the time, but there was something telling me to go out there and listen to this preacher. And then on the other side, I had something that was telling me not to. And as I sat there in the middle of this war, I felt a tugging. Like it wasn't someone pulling on my uniform, but down deep inside, I can feel something tugging for me to go out there. And I didn't understand it at the time. So I gave in to the tugging. I stood up and I walked to the door and I opened the door and I looked out there at this preacher I just cussed out 20 minutes ago. And I was relieved because I knew I had to go out there. But I was relieved because every single chair in front of this man was taken. So there was nowhere for me to sit. So I felt relieved, like, I ain't got to go out there. So I closed the door and I sat there for a few seconds. I don't know why, but I opened this door again and I looked out at this preacher again, and somebody within that few seconds got up and left. And I saw the seat was empty. So I walked out there and I sat in front of this man that I just cussed out. And I'm looking up at him. And as I'm sitting there, well, let me say this before I tell you about that. While I was there this time, I started thinking, what is the purpose of life? Why am I going through this? Why am I in this condition? There was a sense of hopelessness, really, in my heart. So I had 1,000,001 questions, and I didn't have any answers. So now this unfolds, and I'm sitting here in front of this preacher that I just cussed out. And I'm looking up at this man. Now, before this day, in and out of the county jail, I used to go to church. But I'd go and sit in the back and reminisce with my homeboys. It wasn't about listening to the preacher because honestly, I couldn't understand what the preacher was saying. I remember nudging my homeboy in the back and saying, man, what are these people talking about? These people are crazy. What are they saying? Because it was like they were speaking a foreign language. So this day I'm sitting in front of this man, and for the first time in my life, I understood something. It was like a light went on after sitting in darkness for so long. It was like a light turned on, and I knew something. This man was talking about how God loved me so much that he sent his son, Jesus Christ, to die on a cross, to be punished and tortured, to spill his blood so that I could be forgiven for the sins that I committed against God. Now, before this day, I didn't understand God. He was foreign to me. It was strange. But that moment when that light went on, I understood something about God. I understood that God was holy. And I can liken my story to Isaiah chapter 6. I didn't see the Lord seated high on the throne, lifted up, and his robe filled the temple. I didn't see the cherubim in his presence singing, holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. I didn't see that, but I understood, and I saw what he saw was that God was holy. And Isaiah responded when he understood God's holiness by saying woe is me, for I am a man undone. And this is what happened. And I didn't know all this stuff until years later. But at that moment, I understood God's holiness, and then I understood the condition of my heart because I was faced with who he is. Brothers, it was at that moment that I knew what I was. I saw the wickedness and the evil of my heart because I was faced with God's holiness. And it was at that moment that that message that preacher was preaching about Jesus Christ, taking the penalty, the punishment for my sins, that's when it sounded good. That's when I knew that I had found hope. It was at that moment that I knew that I needed God's forgiveness. Now, I've experienced love. We all have experienced love in this world. And it's a worldly love. And the love that we experience, at least that I've experienced, has always had strings attached to it. I'll love you if you've done something for me lately. In this world, I've experienced, like we all have, a forgiveness, but a worldly forgiveness. And that worldly forgiveness is, I'll forgive you today, but if you do something else later, I'm going to throw it right back in your face. And that's all I ever knew. But that day I understood a love that had no strings attached to it. That day I understood a love that regardless of where I was, he was willing to forgive me. That day I understood a forgiveness that was not going to throw it back in my face. And I needed that. I told you days earlier I was pondering all these things about life. And I didn't have any answers. I felt hopeless. But that day I found hope. That day I found forgiveness. So when I understood this, I bowed my head, gentlemen, and I started crying uncontrollably. And I was raised, youngest of 7, that men don't cry. And it was always instilled in me. Don't cry, men don't cry. It's a weakness. But that day I didn't care. That day it didn't matter to me who was sitting around me, because that day I knew I found hope. I knew that I found forgiveness in what God sent his son to do. So I bowed my head and I simply said, God, please forgive me. I remember standing up from that bench and I felt like the world was just lifted off my shoulders. I felt forgiveness that day. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that something happened. I didn't understand it fully, but I knew something happened. I remember walking into the room, an empty cell, and saying to God, God, I don't know who you are. I said, please show me who you are, and please change me. And that was my prayer that day. I picked up that Bible and I started reading because I wanted to know this God who had forgiven me.
Eddie, thank you for that testimony. Very powerful. Spiritual hug right now. I really appreciate that.
Yes.
And it's something that touches me very deeply because your conversion is similar to mine. And I hope that our viewers are really soaking this in, having an open heart that God may come in and through your testimony, that they know that they have the opportunities that we've had. One of hope, one of inspiration, one of guidance. And God is there waiting. And so to our viewers that are watching, pay attention to what Eddie is saying. That salvation is right at the door and it's always knocking. I thank you for that. And so you know that something is about to happen. This change is occurring, and you're on your way to prison.
In those 7 months while I was in prison, I went to church in prison, attended some services, was reading my Bible regularly. Change was taking place. I started understanding life in a different way, seeing life in a different way. So I was released from prison back into the same community that I had just left. And while I was there, I didn't know the importance of finding a church, getting plugged in and finding like-minded men and women. Didn't have anybody come alongside of me and, hey, come on, this is how we do it. I didn't have any discipleship going on in my life. So it was a matter of months that even after knowing the truth, I went right back to the garbage in the streets. I found myself, again, selling drugs, drinking alcohol, smoking weed, all the crazy stuff that God had forgiven me for. There's an importance, there is a mandatory thing that God calls men and women that love him to do, and it's to make disciples. And when we have the lack of discipleship, we don't have any guidance. We don't have any encouragement. So I didn't have this as a young Christian in my life. And it's mandatory that we do this with every born-again believer. We have to take of ourselves and give to these young men and women and show them how to do this thing called Christianity. So I found myself going back to the streets again. And within a matter of 8 months, I got arrested again. Was sentenced to 3 years prison and was released in 9 months. While I went back to prison, I started reading the Bible again. When I got released from prison, I found myself in the same situation. I felt lonely by myself. I didn't have that encouragement. And it never crossed my mind to go out and seek it. I was young in the Word. I didn't have roots yet. I wasn't rooted in His Word. I had an understanding. I had an experience, but I didn't know how to live it. I had faith in God, but I didn't know how big He really was.
True knowledge of God the power of God.
That's right. That's right.
You was missing it.
I was missing it. I didn't have an understanding of it. So I went back to the streets, and I found myself right back in the garbage again. Nobody there to disciple me, nobody there to encourage me, and right back at it. There was a man who owed me money, and I decided to take matters into my hand and go to his house with a pistol. I went to collect the money that was owed to me for the cocaine, and I was arrested for armed robbery with a firearm. Before the day that I got arrested, June 4th of 1999, I was sitting in front of a big screen TV in my house with a Budweiser in my hand. And I remember saying to God, I said, I miss you. I miss that peace, and I miss that joy that you had given me. I said, I want it back. Right after I prayed that prayer, a friend of mine came to pick me up and asked me for some cocaine. He stopped by the house. I said, I don't have any, bro. I'm tired. I just got back from work. I helped a friend of mine lay block that day. So I said, I don't have any. Come back later. He says, no, man, come on. I need some coke. So I said, all right, you drive. I jump in his truck. We go down the street. And as I'm driving down the street, I see a Lexus coming the other way. For some reason, that car caught my attention. And I turned around and looked at it and just turned back around, and we kept driving. I look in the mirror, I see it turn around. We get in from Hollywood into Davie, Florida, and I see a Hollywood cop and a Davie cop, and they're sitting on the swale. Well, when they see us come, I see them leave the swale and get behind us. We pull into Davie, they hit the lights, they pulled us over and at gunpoint and took us out of the truck at gunpoint.
That's a great place to stop right there. You don't want to miss the next episode. There's so much more for Eddie to share with us. You have been listening to the Death or Prison podcast brought to you by leanonmeusa.org. I am Johnny Branham. Thank you so much, Elmo, for being here and for sharing. And thank you so much, Eddie. We are desperately waiting to hear the rest of this story. So
My pleasure.
This has been the Death or Prison podcast, but we say we choose life.
Lean on Me USA, in partnership with Alpha USA, wants to connect you to a welcoming church. To begin a new life, call 314-607-8850.
I can change the world. Each one, teach one. One